tune of the, what's it called when you sing to kids at bedtime? Lullaby. Thank you. Oh my God, it's the tune of the lullaby my dad always sang to me as a kid. That was not as romantic as I thought it would be since I couldn't think of the name. So, friends, if you ever find yourself at the place where Interstate 64 and Highway 41 meet in southern Indiana, do yourself a favor and go eat at the Log Inn restaurant. It's right there. The food is delicious, and it's interesting, too. It's one of the oldest stagecoach stops in the nation. Lincoln ate there. We're from Illinois. We love Lincoln. And Friday night, I got to meet friends there. My dear friend Angie was home to celebrate her aunt and uncle's anniversary and her own 40th birthday. And so my friend Katie drove from Louisville, and we went to eat with all of the Minkies at the Log Inn. You choose your meat, best ham I've ever eaten, roast beef, fried catfish, livers and gizzards. Oh my gosh, it was so good. And then there are heaping bowls of sides, heaping bowls of mashed potatoes, brown and white gravy. There's corn and peas and slaw. Oh, it's so good. And they serve it family style. So you pass around the bowls and you all share. And no sooner had we all filled our plates when the waitress came, and from in front of me, she took this half-full bowl of mashed potatoes away. And I grabbed Angie's arm and said, "She took the mashed potatoes." Oh my God. And Angie said, she did. No, stop her. And I said, ma'am, come back. You took away the mashed potatoes. And she said, "I'm just going to refill the bowl. Miss, calm down. It will be okay." And she did, but it was very odd. They would take the bowls when there was still a bunch of food in them and refill them and bring them back. So at the end of the meal, it looked like we hadn't even started. There were still bowls full of food on the table. And so Angie's cousins, Linda and Nancy, they got doggy bags and take-home boxes. And Linda was piling roast beef into a box. And we were saying, "Linda, take the mashed potatoes here. There's a bunch of them." And that's when Angie's sister said, I don't think you're allowed to do that." "What?" She said, "Yeah, there's a sign there at the front. It says that you're not allowed to take the side dishes home." "Huh? Why?" we all said. She said, "Well, because people come and they ask for more, and they put a little bit on their plate, and they do it just so they can take home a full bowl of mashed potatoes. They don't like you to do that, so you're not allowed to take it home." At that point, Linda said, "Well, I don't care, it's wrong. They're just going to throw away the food. I'm taking it home anyway." We are practical, we Southern Indiana girls. So it was odd to me that they kept refilling the bowls before we had even gotten through that portion, but then you weren't allowed to take home what was left over. It was just odd. So, if you're in Southern Indiana, go. The food is good. It really is. But it's not bread from heaven. It's not that kind of generosity. Let's pray. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be found acceptable in your sight. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Did you know this fun fact? That the most accurate definition of the Hebrew word for that fine, flaky substance that appeared on the ground when the dew had lifted. They got translated manna. The most accurate translation of that word is whatchamacallit. Isn't that fun? And whatchamacallit means we don't actually know what to call it, so we're going to call it whatchamacallit. We don't know what to call that thing that kept us alive. We don't know what to call that thing that showed up and reassured us when we were terrified that we would meet our end. We don't know what to call this surprising gift. And maybe that's a clue that it's not so important what it is. It's important, rather, what's important about whatchamacallit is what it teaches us, how it changes us, how it transforms us. The people Israel have just left Egypt. They've broken free from captivity and fled for their lives into the wilderness. And when I say just left Egypt, I mean they just crossed the Red Sea. It just happened. God has just parted the waters, has just saved them. God has just made a way where there is no way. They have just now arrived in the wilderness, and already they are complaining. But actually, they're scared. I mean, let's be honest about what complaining usually is. It's the thing that pokes itself up out of the water, and the thing that's under the surface is a whole lot of fear. We human beings are so bad at naming our fears, so hesitant to be vulnerable, so we complain instead. So remember that the next time somebody complains to you, ask them what they're afraid of. And you can hear it in the way the Israelites complain, "Oh, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord. There in Egypt, if only we had died, because there as we sat by the flesh pots of Egypt, eating bread, at least we weren't starving, but you've brought us out here to die. We're terrified. We're going to die." But we can't say that. So instead, we'll just complain. God hears their complaint. Rather, God sees past this big wall that they've put up in the form of grumbling and complaining. God sees their fear deep inside, masked as a complaint. And God tends to them, not because they are complaining, not because they are angry, but because they're afraid. And fear will control their lives if it's not tempered. And God is a God who tempers our fear. God knows that fear will disable them. It will inhibit them. It will make them cautious in the most unhelpful and unfaithful ways. If we let it, if we allow it to, fear shapes our decisions, and that is not good. So that's where the whatchamacallit comes in. Again, it's not about what it is. It's about what it does. And what it does is it makes us not afraid. See, God needs to recalibrate the people so that instead of living out of their fears, they are living out their faith. The whatchamacallit shows up. And the instruction is this: go out each day, gather what you need, what you really, truly need. Not for tomorrow, not for next week, not for years from now. Pay attention to what you need for today. Gather it up, what you need for that day. Because there will be more tomorrow. So gather up what you need for today. It will be enough. You have enough. God provides enough. God made the whatchamacallit so that if the people gave in to their fears, if they tried gathering up more than enough, some for tomorrow or next week, or enough because they were afraid that those people who lived in the tent next door would take too much, God made the whatchamacallit to spoil. They couldn't hoard it. They had to recalibrate their senses about what's enough. And friends, when we recalibrate our senses, when we reset our sights on what is truly enough, suddenly we realize the utter abundance that we have. My plate was full of mashed potatoes already. There was no need for me to panic because she was taking them away. But sometimes it takes a long time to recalibrate our sense of what is enough in order to see the abundance around us. If we were only allowed to gather up what we needed to live for one day, though, if we did that, then we would realize how generous we can be. Here, I have plenty of mashed potatoes. You take your fill. So let me say that again. If we were only allowed to gather up what we needed to live for one day, then we would realize how generous we could actually be. Suddenly, our generosity would not be contingent on what's left over. Rather, our generosity would be contingent on realizing whatchamacallit. Because we've gathered what we actually need for this day, no more, no less. We see that we have enough. And we also see that there is more than enough to share. And it's all whatchamacallit anyway. It all comes from God anyway. Everything that we have in this life comes from God. Every bit of it. And yet we get so afraid that it's not enough. And so we act like the people Israel. We get afraid. And when we can't admit that we're afraid, then we complain. And then maybe we try to hoard it. Save up enough for us and for our people. And then maybe if there's some left over, then we can be generous. But that's not the way It's not the way that God got the people through the wilderness. No, the bread of heaven works by first realizing what is enough for us, and then once we realize that, we realize how generous we can be. So I have to admit to you that this is the time of year, every year, when I tend to be like the Israelites. This is the time of year, every year, when I lose sleep, when I wake up too early, worrying, thinking that we will be out here in this wilderness all alone. It's the time of year when we sit in church life board meetings and we start to figure out how the budget is finally going to work. You know, something else fell from the sky this year. It was not manna. It was snow. And we've exceeded our budget for snow removal by double already. That's what happened last winter during this financial year, and we still have November and December to go. So we're anticipating a shortfall in our budget, and we have some reserves, but you know, our reserves are really cute. That's how small they are. They're very cute. And then a passage like this pops up, and you think to yourself as a pastor, I could lay here awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, worrying about the budget. Or we could tell the story, and we could remind people that what we have in our lives too is whatchamacallit. And that perhaps instead of worrying about it, as the Israelites did, we can name what we are afraid of. We can talk about how to recalibrate our sense of what is enough. And perhaps there is someone who says, we have enough, and therefore I have more to give. I have more to share. Now, some pastors would be the kind of pastor who would stand up here and give that example and then say, so maybe today extra money would come in the offering plate. Maybe somebody would do that. I'm not that kind of pastor. I'll just tell you that some pastors might do that. It's all whatchamacallit. Every bit of it. May the Spirit move not only in this space, but in our lives, in our everyday lives, so that we, as members of this community and as citizens of this place, as people who live in this country, as people who live in this world, might look at what we have and be honest with ourselves about what is enough, so that we can be honest about the abundance of gift that we have in our lives. Because there's not just enough for me and you, but the way God has arranged this world, there's enough for everyone. It is all whatchamacallit, after all.